We're continuing to look at the resurrection stories in the Gospels. Today I want to take a look at, remind us of Jesus' crucifixion. When Jesus predicts it, he talks about being arrested, beaten, killed, and resurrection. He puts those things together, death and resurrection. And I think that's important for us to realize. Sometimes we kind of separate the events, crucifixion over here, and then we bring up the resurrection. Example here, many years ago, Mel Gibson did the Passion, and this year he's now putting together the story of the resurrection, which is a long way away, because we kind of separate those things. I want to take a look at the crucifixion. It's a story that we're all familiar with, so I don't need to do it in every gospel. But since we're in Mark, I want to use Mark to remind us. The important thing about the resurrection is that Jesus is dead. Jesus is dead. He's not resuscitated. He's resurrected. Much like Lazarus. We'll see that in John, story of John. Jesus is buried for 3 days. And I always wondered why 3 days. That's because the fact that in tradition, that the soul leaves the body after the third day. There's no chance of resuscitation. So the most important part of the resurrection is Jesus is dead.
Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
So the 3 days, I know that Jewish people sit Shiva for 3 days. Is that something that they did then, and so that ties into the 3 days, or they do it because it was 3 days for Jesus? Do you have any idea?
Not about the Jewish, but I know Christian traditions was that the body would be waked for 3 days and then buried. They don't do that today. It's like, we have a wake and then, we don't do a wake, sorry.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I know they call it sit and Shiva, but I don't know how many days they do it really.
no, I don't. I know they have a certain amount of time within 24 hours to clean up all the blood. You see that in Mel Gibson's Passion. You'll see Mary going up with linen cloths and soaking up all his blood from where he was whipped. So there is this sense of traditions that I'm not familiar with. But the thing is, with the resurrection, Jesus is dead. There can be no question about that. Right? The day before, he goes to the garden. Everybody knows that story of the garden. He prays 3 times. I think that's significant, and that he's worried about it. This is not easy for Jesus to be crucified. It's not easy for him, and he has to struggle with his humanity so that he is faithful, and it's because of us that he is faithful. He knows that if he's faithful, it will resonate through generations and generations and generations. And so his mind is on us when he struggles with us. But I think what's important about that story is prayer in the times of great difficulty. Sometimes we take prayer for granted. But with that example of Jesus, it's okay to be anxious about your life, anxious about where you find your situation is, and turn that anxiety into prayer. The fact that Jesus went 3 times, to me, is significant. And when he comes out, he says, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And I think he's talking about himself there. I think he's talking about himself. And he has to strengthen his physical body. for what's about to happen. All right? So Judas has gone to the chief priest. He's betrayed Jesus, got his money, and we're going to begin there in verse 43, 14:43. And immediately while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard." And when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and he kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to them, "Have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple, teaching, and you did not seize me. Well, let the scriptures be fulfilled." And they all left him and fled. Detail. Mark, of course, is very concise about it. But the actions of Judas is different. He's not only giving them information, he is actively going to show who he is. And that's because it's night, and that's because there's guards who may not know who Jesus is. And so that's necessary for him to do that. But what's interesting is he kissed him. Rabbi kissed him. And he kissed him. And so they led him away. The servant struck the servant of the high priest, cut off his ear. All right. 50, and they all left him and fled. Remember, prior to this, Peter said, "Oh, no, I won't, I'll be there with you. And I won't. And Jesus said, "Well, you're going to deny me 3 times. No, don't, Jesus, no, I'm not going to deny you. I may run, but I'm not going to deny you." And of course, all the other disciples said, "Oh, yeah. We say things, but sometimes when the rubber meets the road, we don't act the way we should." And that's exactly what happens with them. So they all left him and fled. That's going to be important to remember. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth around his body, and they seized him. But he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. Now, traditionally, they believe that this is John Mark, who writes the gospel. They believe that traditionally this is John Mark. His mother was at the house where they met for the Lord's Supper, the Passover meal, and will be the house where the disciples will go after the death of Jesus. And they led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. And Peter followed at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he was sitting with guards, warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death. But they found none. Very important here. They want to give the image of a fair trial. We know that deck is stacked. We know that what's going to come out, but they want the public to see, this idea that this was a fair trial. All right? So they found, for many bore false witness against him, and their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him. We heard him say, "I will destroy the temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands." We remember that. Yet even about this, their testimony did not agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst of and said to Jesus, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" And he remained silent, made no answer. Again the chief priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus said, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and and coming with the clouds of heaven. The high priest tore his garments. What further witness do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying, prophesy. And the guards received him with blows. All right, so now we see the stat deck. They got it, they've arrested him, and he suffers being spit on, being covered, and being beaten. So the humiliation begins. And I want you to remember, the humiliation begins with the Jewish leaders, the Sanhedrin. It doesn't begin with the Romans. It begins here with this. So they're setting the stage here of rebellion. All right? Okay. And seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, you also were with Nazarene Jesus. But he denied it, saying, I neither knew nor understood what you mean. And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. A servant who saw him began to say to the bystanders, this man is one of them. But again he denied it, and after a little while the bystanders again said to Peter, certainly you are one of them, for you're Galilean. And he began to invoke a curse on himself, and to swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he broke down and wept. Peter's denial, I think is important here. Reminds us of how our environment can pressure us to do things we wouldn't normally do. I want to be very careful that we don't badmouth Peter. He does the human thing as we all would do. So very few of us would play the martyr role. Many of us, matter of fact, in the early church around the 3rd, 4th century, right after Dominion's persecution, many people of the church left. And of course, you remember they had to take a cross, a picture of the cross, on a stone, and they had to step on it. Now, in that culture, that is a very demonstrative dislike or condemnation. So they had to step on this cross, meaning Jesus, and they had to renounce him and then accept worship to one of the emperor's gods. At this time, the emperors were worshipped as a god. All right? Now the question is after the persecution, what do you do with these Christians? What do you do with the Christians who denied Jesus? Not only denied him, but said we don't want any part of him, and then accepted and then worshipped the emperor as a god. What do you do with them? And so that becomes a struggle for the next 50 years. What do we do with them? And do we accept them back into the church? And if we do, what do we do with them? So one of the early church fathers, and when I say church fathers, I'm referring to people who wrote or were bishops during this time, was in Carthage. And he, instead of going through this, he escaped, and what he did was he took all the biblical records with him, and he escaped with them. And he said, the reason I escaped was because I had all these records, and I did not want them to be destroyed. And so there is this idea that Peter reminds us here that sometimes we might say the right things or do the right things because of pressure. I know I've done that a couple of times. So we need to be very careful here about what we say about Peter and see our own story in it. I think that's significant in narratives, is that you see your own story in here being portrayed out. All right, so they asked him and he said, accused him of many things, Pilate again. Okay, and I'm sorry. And they delivered him over to Pilate. Now remember, Pilate is who? There are 3 governors. 2 of them are sons of Herod. The 3rd one is a Roman governor. And that's because of the revolt that took place just after Herod's death. And Rome had to come in and straighten things out. And when they did, they kind of divvied up the political situation. So Pilate is a governor of a certain section. Now he's in Rome because his army's in Rome. And so they're billeted up. He's there in case there's any problems. And so they delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." Very straightforward. Very straightforward. Mark is to the point. He's not going to bring in a whole lot of this conversation, but he hits the main points. Very concise. You are king of the Jews. Why is that an important question to ask, by the way? Why does Pilate ask him that specific question?
They thought he was going to start a revolution and that he would be the king.
Okay. And why would that be significant to Pilate? What are they asking Pilate to do?
Kill him.
Crucify him. You do not crucify robbers. You do not crucify blasphemers. You do not crucify whatever crime it is. You only crucify political adversaries. All right? So that's why he asks, "Are you king of the Jews?" He's being very pointed. If you want me to kill you, I have to know. And so he asked him, "Are you king of the Jews?" And he says, "No, you have said so." And the chief priests, verse 3, and the chief priests accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further answer. So that Pilate was amazed. All right? He's amazed because here's a man who's being accused, all these charges. He claims he's the king of the Jews, but yet he doesn't defend himself. And this is kind of odd for Pilate, kind of odd for us, because we would want to defend ourselves, but he doesn't. And so I have to ask myself the question, why? I mean, here's a prime time for Jesus to proclaim himself, proclaim the kingdom of God, make it known, but he doesn't. He chooses to go quietly to his fate. But Jesus made no further answer, and so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the feast, he used to release one prisoner of whom they cast. And among the rebels in prison, notice what he said. Among whom? Rebels in prison.
Resurrectionists.
Yeah, that's right. Committed murder in the insurrection. All right? These are not thieves that sit next to Jesus, even though they're called thieves. These are fellow rebels, insurrectionists, probably zealots. This time zealots were very active. The zealots, I don't know if you studied this, the Zealots were a political party who believed that if they started a war with Rome, God would intervene and save the nation. And so they were out to make war. And so they killed people. They, took people. They assassinated people. Their goal was to make war against Rome. They wanted the Roman army to come down, and that would force God to do what he does, to intervene. That's an interesting strategy. Make war so God will come down and define it. Years ago, and I'm speaking from my own memory here, years ago, there was move among certain Christians that they wanted to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. They wanted to tear down the Hebrew, the Muslim mosque, and they wanted to rebuild the temple. And they did so because they thought God would act and intervene. And they did so much, they even bred certain sacrificial animals that could sacrifice at this temple. It's a very shocking thing. But that mood was the same way. Let's cause a war and cause God to interact. And I think that's an interesting thought.
How long ago was that? Did that happen where they wanted to tear down the mosque?
I would say back in the 80s.
In the 80s?
Back in
The 1980s?
1980s.
I don't remember hearing about that.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something. Okay. I'm thinking about sometimes we want to make God do something. And how do we do that? How do we ask God to do something for us? And do we ever try to force God's hands? If I do this, will you do this? I can remember a movie with Burt Reynolds in it. I forget the name of it. But he wants to commit suicide. And Dom DeLuise always stops him from doing it. And he wants to commit suicide. And Dom DeLuise is always there. And he stops him. There's several times he does it. And so he decides he's going to swim out as far as he can and drown. And he swims out as far as he can. He's getting tired. And Dom DeLuise is nowhere to be had. And so then he says, well, I don't want to die. God, please, if you let me get back to shore, I promise I will do this. And he stops and he starts swimming back to shore. And each time he stops and asks God for something, it's a little less. It's a little less. And then when he finally gets to shore, he says, well, you know what I said was just, But it's interesting to see that he gets out there to the point where, okay, I don't want to do this. God, I'm going to force your hand. All right, I'm going to promise to do these things. So to make a bargain. Well, whether we realize it or not, bargaining is part of our grief process. We want to bargain our grief process. And so we may bargain and try to bargain with God about getting rid of this or whatever we're looking for. So bargaining is part of our process, part of our human process of grief. It happens. Okay, so now Mark wants us to remember Jesus is being crucified because he claims to be king. These are not thieves. I know we call them thieves. They're not thieves. They're rebels, insurrectionists. Mark makes that very clear. Why? Why does Mark even introduce these rebels? Of course, Taylor does because Barabbas. But why is he adamant about calling them rebels and prisoners. And again, it goes back to this idea of crucifixion. He wants us to recognize Jesus is dying not because of something he said or something he's done. He's being crucified because of who he claims to be. Right? And there was a man named Barabbas, and the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate, do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief of priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to him, what shall I do with the man you call King of the Jews? How many times does he mention King of the Jews? 3 times. Mark likes threes. He does. But again, he's driving home a point. When I was studying, writing sermons, and preaching, there is a difference in writing a sermon and speaking a sermon. And so there's a distinction. A lot of preachers don't realize that today, but there's a distinction. When you're preaching a sermon, you're going to have to repeat the main point 3 to 4 times. Not different points, but 3 to 4 times. Why? So it'll stick. And it'll clarify it, so that people don't do that. And so Marcus believed that these people are reading this, so he constantly repeats, so it comes and sinks into their brain. This is what it is. So it's important that Marcus clarifying why Jesus is dying. Now, why is that important to us? And how does that make our relationship with Jesus either deeper or better, knowing that he's king? Knowing that he's king. Because remember, Mark is writing this to Christians who've already accepted Jesus as Lord, who've already been baptized, already members of churches. Why is it important? And why is it important to you?
Well, is that not the central theme of what the crucifixion was about? We as people, sometimes I guess there's a point in all of that, and that's just a constant reminder that was the hinge point or the focal point on what this was all. The resurrection is all about. If we didn't have that, as gruesome as it was, we don't have anything.
Okay.
We're a false religion.
Okay. Now, does Pilate understand the term King of the Jews? You think? I'm just asking, we don't know. I'm just asking your imagination. You think he understands this?
I've thought about Pilate occasionally about that situation, and I thought, Terry, what would you do? In that situation, I don't know what his religious beliefs were, but here he is. The Roman government will kill him if he doesn't, I guess, acquiesce to the situation. Here we got to, they say, hey, we want, the crowd says that, and mainly by the Pharisees, we want to kill Jesus. And according to the scripture here, this passage anyway, is Pilate's. He's trying to get some breath for Jesus. To say, hey, look, I don't see anything. What's he done? What are y'all so upset about? But if he said, no, I'm not going to, then he's gonna be hung out to dry big time.
Yeah.
And so it's his life that he's looking at. And so maybe it's no different than anybody else throughout history when you get to a point that where your own breath is going to be stomped out of your face. You know, he's just simply saying, look, I've got my own, I'm concerned for my own life here. It's either me or Jesus, you know, or the crowds, or at least ways the military is gonna do me in. So I thought that's a tough thing.
It's a tough thing for Pilate, but we see here, I don't know, I kind of admire Pilate. I do so because he is governor, and he does this all the time in judgment. People bring cases before him, and he makes judgment. And here's a man standing in front of him who claims to be the king of the Jews. Well, where's his army? Where are the generals? Where are his soldiers? And has he said he's going to upheaven the kingdom? I mean, has he said he's going to wipe out the Romans? He's not saying anything. And so Pilate is like, what do I do with this guy? And so he gives the Jews an opportunity to bring cases against him. Okay, you tell me why you think he's king of the Jews needs to be crucified. And they're not bringing up anything that's relevant to a revolution. You know? They don't have, you know, here's all his weapons. You know, we did a raid on his glory list, and here's all his weapons. There's nothing there. And there's nothing in his teachings that come across to Pilate as warranting to death on a cross. That tells me that crucifixion in Rome, and especially here in Pilate, he takes that very serious. He takes that very serious, that he knows whatever he says is going to go down in record. Crucifixion is not a daily thing. It's not the electric chair. It's not firing squads. This is different. And I think sometimes we just think the cross is just so Jesus gets nailed to the cross and he dies. No. There's a whole thing that takes place. He has to be humiliated. All right? It's about shame.
And they usually don't die in one day even.
No.
They're usually, people are crucified, I think they said they hang on the cross conscious sometimes for 7 days.
Yeah. And they let the crows have their way with them. You know, peck out their eyes.
Very degrading.
Yes. And, you know, we see Jesus, images of Jesus on the cross with a loincloth. There's no loincloth.
No.
He's completely naked up there. And it's meant to do that, to humiliate him. All right? And he humiliates the Jews because they're rejecting this king of the Jews. And so on the other hand, what is going on here? Why are they, you know, why, if he's king of the Jews, why are they up in arms and want him crucified? And so he thinks it's just because they're jealous, you know, or that he wants power, and they don't want to give him. So he devises this thing to allow the people to decide, what do you want to do with him? All right? And he's amazed that the people shouted out all the more, crucify him. So Pilate was wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. All right, so Mark does not get into this, too much about the scourging. He just mentions it. All right, wishing to satisfy the crowd. Why would he want to satisfy the crowd? It's not because he's a coward. And I know everyone thinks so. Now, I want you to think that. Why does...
Calm them down.
Yes, to keep them calm.
Prevent a riot.
But that's right. He does so to prevent a riot. This Pilate is pretty smart. I know traditionally we think of him as kind of dumb and kind of, you know, weak, but he's not. And the story says so. It tells us he takes this very serious. He's just not going to crucify anybody they want to crucify. All right, so he delivers them up. Verse 16, and the soldiers led him away. Okay. And the soldiers led him away inside the palace. That is the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole battalion. And they clothed him in purple cloak and twisted together a crown of thorns. They put it on him. And they began to salute him, Hail, King of the Jews. All right, so he's taking a whole battalion.
How many is that? How many is a battalion?
I was afraid somebody would ask me that.
How many is what?
A battalion.
A battalion. I can tell you in modern terms, a battalion is made up of 3 or 4 companies, depending.
How many's in a company?
You have squads within a company that have 20 people in a squad, and there's 4 people in
So
4
it's
squads.
saying a huge amount.
Yes, this is probably, they probably emptied the barracks. And so they're leading him away just in case there is a riot, or just in case somebody tries to rescue you. Right?
Doug, I was gonna say something earlier when we were discussing Pilate, and all of this was God's plan, but he had to have, he had to have people to carry out his plan. And so I thought, you've got Pilate, and he's, I'm sitting here thinking, is God looking down at this and say, go, 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 the Pilate, and poor Pilate, that's, I understand that, but that was the plan, but all of this had to come together by individuals to bring fulfillment for what God was about there. And whether it's Judas or Pilate or any of these, I think, and then he said, well, all right, this is God saying, all right, you did what I wanted you to do. You're out of here. I think about these things and I think, yeah. I don't know if I'm the only one that thinks that and say, well, why do you think that's crazy?
Why would God know that Jesus would be crucified? Why do you think God knew?
It was his plan. It was the plan for.
Was it planned? Okay. What else? What God know?
What'd you say?
History.
From the beginning.
History with his people. How many times has his people denied him? How many times has his people thwarted his cause and revolted against him? And so he knew what the outcome would be, that these people would do this. Why? Because they've done it in history. I saw a quote once time, if you want to know what man is capable of doing, if you look at what he's done. And I think that's important for us to understand. God understands humanity. Yes, he understands that putting Jesus in is the right time, that he's going to be rejected, as David was, as Moses was, as Elijah and all the prophets were. Remember, Jesus used that parable to talk about this. So God understands there's going to be a revolution here against him. It's just the way history runs. And so in that case, his providence does work because it's that specific time Jesus comes into the world. Now that raises a whole different question, Terry. Why is the time so specific for God to act by sending Jesus in and between AD
In the passage, I don't know where it's here, I think it's, maybe it was Paul, he says at the right time, Listen, there's a lot in that statement because it's the demarcation between what was taking place or what was planned and then what was executed. So at the right, it can't be 40 years later, it can't be 80 years earlier, it's got to be right now. And I've likened that part that you mentioned there as to world wars and country wars or whatever are won and lost at a pinnacle point. It may be one skirmish with 30 people or less, but it wasn't at the right time. And there's so much, well, why couldn't this been done 1,800 years before, or 4,000, or 20,000, whatever, years prior? Why? What took you so long? And there's so much, there's an immensity of wonder behind all of that. That one stay at the right time. Why was that even put in there?
Again, I don't have an answer to that question, but I mentioned it because I don't want to take Jesus' crucifixion and his resurrection as a matter of fact. Oh well, Jesus was executed and he was resurrected on the third day. I want us to understand what's going on here in these stories. Discernment.
And 40 years later, the temple was destroyed.
Yes.
And that was all part of God's timeline.
Yeah. There's a timeline, and I don't know whether he had to bring people to a certain understanding before he acted. I think what you had, of course, you had the Greeks were there for a while. Then the Ptolemies, Egypt was there for a while, and then the Syrians were there for a while, and so then you had the Maccabees, and then you had the Romans, and so it was a time when hope was not available. I mean, what do? You look at your own history. You had the Greeks. You had 1,000 years. You had the Greeks, and then you had the Egyptians. You had the Syrians. You had the Maccabees, which was, wow, we finally set up our own government, the Maccabees, but that was short-lived. And the Romans came in. And so what do? Where is God in all this? And I think maybe it's because it was at a low point, but a point where they needed to recognize God working in their lives. That's my understanding, why it was the right time. Because they were without hope. And they were looking for his deliverance, not theirs. They were anticipating his deliverance. And I think that's one of the reasons why. But he does act at a time. And it makes us stop and think, this story is much more than we've given it credit to. It really needs to be thought about, this idea. And of course the soldiers hailed King of the Jews. They were striking his head with a reed and spitting on it, kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to be crucified. Right? Humiliation. This is done in the privacy of the barracks or in the governor's house. Right? This is the beginning. So this is the beginning.
Doug?
Yes.
This is just an aside on where he was beat in the barracks or in the prison. I can't think of the man the medical doctor here in Wichita that started the world's Museum of World Treasures. But there were some of us.
Dr. Kardatsky.
Yeah, some of us that we toured that had a private tour with him, and he he brought out a brick. He says, I don't normally show this to anybody, but since you're a Christian group, and it was a brick that was supposedly came from barracks, I believe, or the at least ways the cell where Jesus had been kept. And he had it in a special container, and he opened it up and let us touch that for the ones that wanted to. And I thought that was fascinating. Whether it was, hey, maybe it was just, but I don't know. Obviously, he thought it had some value, or he probably wouldn't have paid many thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, whatever. That's his deal. But it was there, and it's not on display.
In the Crusades, one of the things of the Crusades was to get artifacts. And why did they need artifacts? Well, you could sell them money-wise. But why else would the church want artifacts?
They wanted to worship them,
And worship them? Okay. All right. What else?
wanted to prove.
Wanted proof? Okay, what else?
Just maybe a connection for.
Under their altars is an artifact.
What was that?
Under their altars is an artifact. So to build
An altar.
thank you very much, an altar, they needed an artifact. And so that's why the church wanted these artifacts. Not because they had some kind, well, yeah, they believed they had some kind of special powers, but they needed them to do that. Head of John the Baptist is someplace out there in altar land. You have all these artifacts, this piece of the cross, or this piece of the cup, or this log, or this bone from a prophet or something. And so they had to have these artifacts for proof, but also to the and so we'll end there because it's time. But I want us to understand, don't take these stories lightly. Don't just kind of read over them. Stop and think about them. And so we see the beginnings of the humiliation there by the Romans. They're just like having fun with this guy. All right,
Can I say one thing?
sure.
And kind of in response to what Terry was saying about why at this time, I think we tend to forget that we we have a narrow vision of what we're seeing, but God sees the whole plan. And we can't understand the mind of God. I mean, and that's kind of like, why at this time? We don't know. Our vision is too narrow. Only God knows. That's my idea on it.
Yes, we do see things in the short term. It's hard to see things long range. Jerry? Oh, Fred.
I guess my mind was wandering, but I have just a little bit different take on these stories. And basically, I think the resurrection ties both sides of the story together. On the one hand, God created the heavens and the earth, He's got man here. We sin and fall apart, and so things are not going too well in the worldly side. Over on the other side, God's spiritual kingdom, or heaven, or whatever we want to call it, like the kingdom of heaven on earth, and as it goes over there, it's over on the other side. I used to, when I was growing up, there was a phrase that some of us kids had. It wasn't too funny, but we had it. We said, when Rover died, he was dead all over, all but his tail, and it turned over. So what happens over here on the worldly side, throughout the history that we got in the Bible and everything, when something is rejected or done away with it, it's gone. You mentioned several kingdoms coming. They're gone. There's not anything else. So it was very important about the idea of insurrections and that type of thing, because if you lost, and that was over with. Over on the spiritual side, that seems to be the kind of same thing. There are things that go against God. If you try to transcend from the physical to the spiritual, you do fail, and there is some rejection, you might say, which is all about the children of Israel and how they did. But there is a restoration process that continually happens over and over. And it also happens with the New Testament teaching. So the idea here, well, what brings those two together if you're worldly over here and the only concern with that, like when you die, it's all over and no hope, or over here on the spiritual side, when you die, there is some hope. To me, the story of the death and burial and resurrection of Christ brings hope to both sides of that. And I think that's illustrated in the Bible all the way through in what happens on the physical side and what happens on the spiritual side. And it didn't stop with the resurrection. If you remember what happened with Apostle Paul, he was going around, he says, those people that believe in Christ, the Messiah, and they're following his teaching, even though they might at the time of the crucifixion says, whoop, we don't want to have anything to do with his teaching because over here on the physical side, they're putting an end to you. The Apostle Paul was one that was going out and says, I'm going to take care of them. Well, turned out that, there was a restoration process for that's gone out through, and you have those kind of all through. So I think you can go through the Old Testament and the New Testament and all the stories. Peter was a good example of the denial. I mean, I can see Peter on his side. He can say, and I've done this, I think, when I was out playing in the playground or whatever, or somebody. If I didn't like that particular side, it's not that I don't know those people, but I don't agree with what they said, And so then the people were accusing Christ of this particular thing, and they were going to put him to death. Well, Peter was saying, it's not that I don't know Christ, but I can deny anything he's teaching because that's what they're accusing him of. So then Christ shows that, hey, I can understand that there's a restoration process. So to me, the story of the resurrection pulls the world and what we live in and how we deal every day with the same thing on the side of our struggles we live over here on the, Christian life that the worldly side creeps into. We can't fix that, as evidenced by all the things we said this morning about various people having problems. But over here on this side, we have got an assurance that the resurrection not only fixes that with some promises, but it fixes the one we're dealing with now. I talked too much, so that's it.
No, that's okay. You've been gone for a couple of weeks. So you didn't get all that out of you. No, I think you raise a really good point. I hadn't thought about the various kingdoms that existed. The Greeks, the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Romans, the Maccabees. And, you kind of wonder, how long is this new kingdom going to last? How long is this new kingdom going to last? Is it going to be short-lived like the Maccabees? Is there another army going to come in? And what is this going on? And we still struggle with that today. And that's an interesting point. This idea of hope death. And we'll see that in some of the resurrection stories, where people, they put their hope in Jesus and they were discouraged that he was killed.
I have an opinion on that one too.
Okay?
My opinion is that we're living, the kingdom was going to last all of my lifetime. And it's lasted all the lifetimes of people before me and everyone who comes after it. The kingdom is going to last in my lifetime. That's the only time I've got a concept of, and it's going to last while I'm alive. Now, after what goes on after that, or after the second coming, or however we want to talk about it, I don't know. But my confidence and hope is, hey, it's going to last in my lifetime.
Not
okay?
I think that's lunch.
Yes, Linda, do you need help?
All right.
That is so interesting about the nations that you've
Oh,
mentioned.
my goodness.
And how they came into being and then closed, another, and
Okay,
closed, and
yes.
gone. But the
Okay.
kingdom of heaven,
Right.
we've had it 2,000 years, and the
Oh.
gates of hell will not
She was
prevail
just-
against it.
Kind of trained.
That in itself is a witness,
But she sees
that
it
it's from
again,
God.
So she'll be here in a little bit.
because all these other nations have gone by the wayside. But the kingdom of heaven, 2,000 years, that's a God
That
thing.
is correct.
Thank you, God.
I'm mulling over whether I want to say this or not.
We made a project.
You know why people hate the Jews? You want to know why people hate the Jews? Because they haven't been destroyed.
They haven't what?
Been destroyed. They have not been wiped out. You look at all the civilizations, how many of them were wiped out, totally wiped out? Egyptian, Roman, whatever. But they have not, and as much as people for thousands of years have tried to wipe them out, they have not been able to do so.
You know, that,
I'm not saying that's the only reason.
no, but this thing with, you know, in our current history, in our politics, in our world, in the USA right now, in Kansas and Nebraska, the hatred against the Jews is just becomes, you know, there's this, right now is a process that they're trying to unravel this latest plot against a whole passel of the top politicians, including Trump, with this big wrestling federation they had, and they've got 23 names so far. They've got some of them, and one of the things they were upset about, these goons, was about Netanyahu, and I thought, what? So they're going to kill Trump, they're going to kill the top politicians, you know, they had all this set up. They're people, they're absolutely crazy. I mean, I'm fearful for what's happening here in the U.S., for what's, gee. I mean, the whole plan was to kill as many politicians as they could, and they just broke here within the last week, or 4 days ago. It's just, you think, what in the world is wrong with, my goodness.
Reminds me of Guy Fawkes. Everybody know who Guy Fawkes is? They even have a special day, Guy Fawkes Day. Guy Fawkes loaded the bottom of Parliament with all this gunpowder. Hundreds of pounds of gunpowder. He was going to blow them up while they were in session. And so he was caught before he could do that, Guy Fawkes. So they celebrate that every year. The day he was going to execute Parliament. So it goes way back, you know. But I think we're a little digressing.